Having looked at very simple examples for reading data from a file and writing to a file, we can now tackle some of the tasks which have been given here. So task 2, which is about appending a new student, this one here, that should be pretty straightforward to do given the examples that you've worked through. And 4 and 5 here are about updating the file, so we're going to just leave those till the end. 3 and 6 are the ones that we're going to tackle next, because 3 and 6 are really about reading the data from a file and then processing it in some format, and it's all just about displaying it on the screen. So 3 and 6 are the ones that we're going to look at next. So let's see how we might go about doing this, where we can find the marks for just one student using the student ID. So if we have a look at the data here, that means we want to be able to read through the file and then display, be able to type in a student ID and then display all of the marks that they have for the various subjects. So what we'll do is we'll start off with just experimenting with all the different ways that we can read data from a file. So I just need to tidy a few things up before we do that. One is that because every time I've run this, this has ended up adding a new student to my file. My file is now not really in an appropriate format to be read because this is repeating many times. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that and make sure there's only one new line as there is here, and then just save that. And then I'm just going to do the experimenting in a different Python file. So we'll just create a new file here, and then we'll experiment with different ways of reading data from a file. So I've just used the open command. I haven't closed my file yet because I just want to show you how to experiment with different ways of working with files, because you can't remember all of the different things that you can do. I've run this. There aren't any errors in it, so I can just type in sfile and it will tell me that it relates to a particular file, what the name of the file is, and that it's open in read mode, so I can read data from the file. One of the things I find really useful is the dir function, especially when you're experimenting. So I can, and what this gives me is it gives me a list of all of the different things I can do with the variable sfile. So what are the things that I can do with files in Python? So if I type that in, we can ignore the double underscore methods which appear at the beginning, but certainly we can start reading some of these things here which are kind of a self-explanatory. Close we've used when we've closed a file. The closed itself probably is a boolean check to see whether the file is closed. And then there are some other things here. We've got read, which we've used before. We've then got readable, which is probably a boolean to check whether we can read the file, whether the file is in a readable state. We then have read line and read lines. So we've got two different ways of reading just individual lines of data. So let's see what read line and then read lines gives us. So firstly, let's just use line as the name of a variable. So you can call this whatever you want to, but I'm just going to call it line, and I'm going to try and invoke the readline method on sfile. So let's type in readline here and see what happens. Let's run this program. So what should now happen is if I type in line, it gives me the very first line of my file. And so that's quite interesting. And I suppose I could then possibly have another variable called line2. and I can read line again from my S file and run this program. And now if I see what's in line 2, I get the second line. It can tell that it's the next line because it looks for the new line character. So the first line gives me the headings and the subjects, and the next line gives me the data to do with one student. But these are still strings, and you can tell that they're strings because there is a quote in front of here and an end quote here, and there are no square brackets indicating that they are lists or anything of that nature. So having looked at just lines, so that's kind of interesting because we can read individual line data. Now let's just see what read lines does, because that was also a function. So let me just show you how I found that out. So I just used dir, which is in Windows it means a directory listing, listing of all the folders. But here I think it just means give me a list of all the things that you could possibly do with a file. So we've had a look at read, which reads all of the data as one giant string. We've used read line, which gives us just one line at a time. And now we're going to see what read lines does, and whether that gives us data in a different format so that we can then do different stuff with it. So I'm just going to restart my shell, and I'm just going to delete these here and now create a new variable, this time lines equals sfile dot read lines, and see what that gives me. So let's run this program, and now if I type in lines, let's see what we get. Oh, lines is interesting because if you have a look at how this is presented to you, you've got a square bracket at the beginning and a square bracket at the end, meaning that this is a list. And if we then have a look inside here, we have got one string which represents one whole line, and then we've got another string which is the next item in the list. So we can look at the data. Just for example, I can type in lines 2 because this is a list, and that should give me the third line of data. And let's just check that. 1, 2, 3. So that gives me the data for MH1. It's still not brilliant for us to find an individual student because it's still got the tabs in there, and it's still got the new line, which we'll have to do something with, but at least we've got a way of getting individual lines of data using our read lines function, which works on files. So having looked at the file, I'm now just going to close it. So we close the file and then run this program, and that's all fine. So in this section we looked at basically just using the function read, and we also looked at what happens when we use the function read line, which reads one line at a time from the file, and we also looked at read lines, which reads all of the data in and puts each line as a separate string. So in the next video we're going to have a look at which one of these would be the most appropriate for us to use if we are trying to find just data for one student and then display that on the screen.